Before this story begins, remember one thing. The human ship called Mercy of Dawn is not arriving as warship. It is arriving as rescue vessel, and that makes what the aliens discover even more terrifying.
The first alien officer to scan the human vessel stopped breathing for 11 seconds. Not because the ship was large. It was not. Not because it carried obvious weapons. It did not. Not because it entered the quarantine perimeter at impossible speed, broadcasting threats into the dark. It moved slowly, carefully, almost gently, its white hull scarred by old burns and micrometeor impacts, its side marked with a blue medical cross that every civilized species in the Coalition recognized as a symbol of aid. And yet every scanner aboard the alien blockade screamed the same impossible conclusion. The human ship was built to survive a war. Commander Sereth of the Varen Quarantine Fleet stood before the tactical display and watched the vessel drift toward the sealed moon of Karos 7, where 8 million colonists had supposedly died behind a plague barrier 43 days ago. No ship had been allowed to enter since. No ship had been allowed to leave. The Coalition had decided that mercy was too dangerous, and law had wrapped that decision in clean words. Containment, sterilization, necessary loss. Then humanity arrived with one ship. Its registry identified it as the EHS Mercy of Dawn, a civilian emergency response arc from Earth. Its crew count was listed at only 312. Its declared purpose was humanitarian extraction. Its captain had sent one comm message before crossing the outer warning line. We received survivors' distress traffic. We are going in. Sereth ordered a deep scan because every species lied in a quarantine zone, especially species too young to understand why the rules existed. The first layer of the human ship's hull looked ordinary, polished ceramic white and medical grade, but beneath it lay impact dispersal armor thicker than the plating on most Coalition destroyers. Beneath that was thermal webbing, then compression mesh, then a radiation catch layer, then structural ribs shaped to flex instead of break. The medical ship did not look armored from the outside, because humans had hidden the armor under the symbol of mercy. The weapons scan made less sense. There were no forward batteries, no conquest beams, no siege cannons, but inside the vessel, aimed toward its own cargo decks, were hundreds of precision emitters arranged in overlapping grids. They could seal compartments, sterilize air, cut through bulkheads, or burn entire sections clean from the inside within seconds. The young scanner specialist beside Sereth whispered, "Commander, why would a rescue ship need to kill itself?" Sereth did not answer. On the display, the Mercy of Dawn continued toward the plague moon. Then the biological scan completed. 312 humans stood inside that ship with elevated heart rates, overheated blood, stress chemistry high enough to indicate terror in any sane species, and neurological patterns so sharp they resembled combat anticipation. Yet none of them were panicking. None of them were retreating. They were eating, checking equipment, loading stretchers, sealing helmets, and waiting with the calm discipline of creatures who had already accepted that rescue might require walking into death. Sereth opened a channel, intending to order them back. Before she could speak, the human captain transmitted again. "Commander, your scans missed something under the colony ruins." Sereth's mouth went dry. "Something," the captain said, "is still knocking back." Commander Sereth did not believe in ghosts, and yet the sound that came through the human transmission made every officer on her bridge become very still. It was not a voice. Not exactly. It was a pattern of impact, faint and uneven, buried under static and atmospheric distortion from the sealed moon below. 3 knocks. A pause. 2 knocks. A longer pause. 3 knocks again. The rhythm repeated with the exhausted stubbornness of something trapped in the dark, too weak to scream, too determined to stop. The Varen communications officer turned from his station, his throat plates tight with discomfort. "Commander, that signal is not in any coalition emergency code." The human captain's voice answered before Sereth could respond. "No, it is in ours." The bridge fell silent again, but this time the silence had changed shape. Before, it had been the silence of officers watching an unauthorized vessel violate quarantine law. Now it was the silence of people forced to wonder whether the law had made them deaf to someone still alive. Sereth stared at the moon on the forward display. Karos, 7 hung below them like a bruised pearl, wrapped in a trembling amber quarantine shield. Its cities were invisible beneath storm bands of ash and sterilizing mist. 43 days ago, Coalition Medical Intelligence had declared the colony biologically dead. 42 days ago, the first sterilization vote had been delayed. 31 days ago, rescue options had been formally dismissed as non-viable. 12 hours from now, unless the council postponed again, the moon would be burned clean from orbit. And now, a human rescue ship had crossed 3 warning lines because it had heard knocking. Sereth forced her voice to remain level. "Captain, you will halt your vessel immediately. Your claim will be reviewed through proper quarantine channels." The reply came quickly, calm and almost gentle. "Commander, with respect, proper channels already buried them once." Several officers looked up at that. The words were not shouted. They were not insulting. That made them worse. They landed with the quiet precision of a blade placed exactly where armor was thinnest. Sereth's senior tactical officer, Vaughn, stepped closer to her chair. "Commander, they are still approaching the perimeter. Their drive signature has not reduced." "I can see that," Sereth said. The human ship moved closer to the amber shield, its medical white hull glowing under the reflected quarantine light. It should have looked fragile there. One vessel against an entire blockade. But the longer Sereth looked at it, the more the illusion of fragility began to break. The Mercy of Dawn was not shaped like a warship, but it carried itself like something designed by people who believed disaster had teeth. Its engine output was restrained, almost polite, yet underneath that restraint sat reserves deep enough to power through damage that would cripple a coalition cruiser. Its outer markings promised aid, but its structure promised refusal. It was a contradiction made of steel. "Run the internal scan again," Sereth ordered. "Focus on the inward, facing emitters." The scanner specialist, a young officer named Ilian, obeyed with hands that moved too fast over the glass controls. Reconfirming now. Emitters are arranged along medical corridors, cargo wards, triage compartments, decontamination locks, and evacuation bays. They are not mounted for external engagement. "Then what are they?" Vaughn demanded. Ilian swallowed. "Containment tools, cutting systems, fire breaks, sterilization grids. If contamination spreads through the ship, they can isolate infected sections within seconds." "And kill everyone inside those sections," Vaughn said. The young officer hesitated. "Yes." A low murmur passed through the bridge. Sereth let it pass, because the thought had already entered all of them. The human ship had not hidden weapons inside a hospital. It had built a hospital that could amputate parts of itself to save the rest. It was not cruelty. It was preparation of a kind the Coalition had never considered civilized. The human captain transmitted a data packet. Sereth almost refused it on principle, then saw the tag attached to it. Recovered distress fragment. Origin. Karos, 7 underground sector. "Open it," she said. The forward display split. On one side remained the approaching human ship. On the other appeared a corrupted strip of audio and telemetry, cleaned by human signal filters, but still ragged with interference. There was breathing first, small and strained. Then the knocks again. 3, 2, 3. After that came a child's voice, thin as wire. "Earth rescue code. Still awake. Still awake. still awake. Sareth felt the temperature of the bridge change, though she knew that was impossible. Varens did not shiver the way humans did, but something ancient in her spine tightened all the same. That cannot be from the colony, Vaughn said. There were no human citizens registered on Caros 7. The human captain answered through the open channel. There were no human citizens listed in your final census. There were human relief workers beneath the capital. When the shield went up, they taught the children an old emergency rhythm while the upper levels were collapsing. Sareth looked sharply at Ilian. Verify. Ilian's hands moved again, slower this time, because now everyone was watching him as if the truth might become less terrible if it took longer to arrive. Cross-checking pre-quarantine labor manifests, searching for non-citizen aid contractors, medical volunteers, independent relief groups, foreign disaster teams. For several seconds, only the faint knocking filled the bridge. Then Ilian's face changed. There were humans, he said quietly. 26 registered as temporary crisis volunteers after the first infection wave. Their records were marked evacuated before the final seal. Marked by whom? Sareth asked. Ilian's eyes moved across lines of data. His voice became smaller. Coalition Emergency Authority. No one spoke after that. The Mercy of Dawn reached the outer edge of the quarantine shield and stopped just short of contact. Not because Sareth had ordered it to stop, because the humans had chosen the exact line where stopping meant patience rather than obedience. Captain Mara Vale appeared on the display at last. She was not in armor. That unsettled Sareth more than armor would have. The human wore a dark emergency flight jacket with a medical emblem stitched over the heart. Her hair was tied back. Her face was tired in the way of someone who had not slept enough and had long ago stopped pretending fatigue mattered. Behind her, crew members moved with focused urgency, fastening helmets, checking oxygen seals, loading compact stretchers into launch tubes. No one looked heroic. That was the most frightening part. They looked practiced. Commander Sareth, Mara Vale said, I am not asking you to lower the shield. I know you will not do that yet. I am asking you to look at what your own files just showed you. Sareth's jaw tightened. You accessed Coalition records? You transmitted quarantine authority markers while warning us away. Your encryption is old. Also, one of your junior officers is better at noticing hidden data than whoever tried to bury it. Ilian went very still. Sareth did not look at him. You are accusing the Coalition of falsifying evacuation records. I am saying there are children alive under that moon who learned a human distress rhythm from people your files claim left before the seal. Mara's voice did not rise. You can call that whatever your laws require. I am calling it a rescue. Vaughn's patience broke. Captain, if you breach that shield and carry the pathogen outward, every inhabited world along this corridor could face exposure. Mara turned her eyes toward him. That is why we came. The answer made no sense for one impossible second. Then the scan overlay shifted, and Sareth saw what the human ship had been charging while they spoke. Not weapons, not engines, decontamination fields, mobile quarantine chambers, vacuum-separated rescue corridors. The Mercy of Dawn was not preparing to break containment. It was preparing to carry containment inside itself. Ilian whispered, They are going to make their own quarantine zone. Mara heard him. Somehow, through the channel, she heard him. Yes, she said, around every survivor we pull out. Sareth stood. She did not remember deciding to. Captain Vale, even if survivors remain, you do not know what is down there. For the first time, the human captain's calm expression shifted, not into fear, into something older, harder, and far more intimate. No, Commander, Mara said. But whatever it is, it has been listening to those children knock for 43 days.
So far, Commander Sareth has discovered the coalition may have buried the truth. while Captain Maraville and the Mercy of Dawn are preparing to enter Cruise 7 for survivors still knocking beneath the ruins. But now, something under the moon is listening too, and it does not want that door opened.
A warning tone sounded across the Varen bridge. Ilian spun back to his console. Commander, the quarantine shield is reacting. The amber glow around Karos 7 rippled. Deep beneath the surface, under the dead capital, something answered the children's rhythm with a signal so powerful it punched through the shield and lit every scanner in the fleet. 3 knocks, 2 knocks, 3 knocks. Then a voice that was not human whispered through every channel at once. Do not open the door. The voice passed through the blockade like cold light. Every ship heard it. Every console caught it. Every officer on every bridge froze beneath the same impossible transmission. And for one suspended moment, the quarantine fleet stopped being a military formation and became a room full of living things listening to the dark speak back. Do not open the door. The words were not loud. They did not need to be. They slipped through command channels, emergency bands, medical frequencies, engine diagnostics, private suit comms, and encrypted council relays with the intimate certainty of something that had already been inside the system before anyone noticed. On the Mercy of Dawn, 312 humans stopped what they were doing for less than a breath, then continued sealing helmets, loading rescue pods, and checking containment locks as if the dead moon had not just warned them away in a language it should not know. That response frightened Commander Sereth more than the voice itself. Humans startled. She knew that much from basic xenological files. They had fear reflexes. They had panic chemistry. They had survival instincts so aggressive that their own bodies could flood themselves with pain-killing compounds when wounded. But the crew of the Mercy of Dawn did not scatter when the voice spoke. They did not demand explanations. They absorbed the new danger and folded it into their work, as if impossible things were not interruptions, as if impossible things were simply part of the job. Source, Sereth ordered. Ilian was already trying. His eyes moved across 3-layered displays, each one filling with red rejection markers. Signal origin is below the capital ruins, approximately 9 kilometers beneath the old civic district. It is not using standard transmission hardware. It is riding the quarantine shield harmonics. That is not possible, Vaughn said. Ilian did not look away from his console. I know. Then find the equipment producing it. There is no equipment signature. Vaughn's throat plates flared. Then what spoke? Before Ilian could answer, Captain Mara Vale's image sharpened on the central display. Behind her, the Mercy of Dawn had changed. The calm motion of preparation had become coordinated acceleration. Medical teams moved in pairs. Rescue pilots strapped into narrow drop chairs. Deck lights shifted from white to deep blue. Somewhere behind the captain, a crew member handed out small packets of food to people already sealed in hazard gear, and the ordinary tenderness of the gesture landed strangely against the terror filling the channel. Mara looked directly at Sereth. Commander, I need your colony maps. Sereth almost laughed at the audacity, but the sound died before it reached her mouth. You heard the same transmission we did. Yes. And you still intend to enter. Yes. That voice told us not to open the door. Mara's expression did not soften, but something in her eyes grew heavier. Commander, survivors have been knocking for help for 43 days. Something else just tried to make sure we stop listening. The words struck the bridge harder than an accusation. Sereth turned back toward the moon, toward the amber barrier surrounding the dead world, toward the buried signal that had spoken with a voice older than any emergency channel. Until that moment, fear had been the simple answer. The voice said stay away, so they should stay away. But the human captain had turned the fear around and revealed the hidden question beneath it. If something wanted the door closed, what was trapped on the other side? Sereth's command console flashed. A priority directive from Coalition Emergency Authority opened without her approval, spilling red text across her private screen. Do not assist human vessel. Maintain quarantine integrity. Sterilization authority remains active. Any breach attempt is to be classified as hostile contamination risk. The directive had been issued 9 seconds after the unknown voice spoke. Sareth read it twice. Her skin tightened beneath her uniform. Someone at Coalition Command had reacted too quickly. Ilian, she said carefully, when did the emergency authority receive the deep signal? The young scanner specialist hesitated. Commander. Answer. He pulled a timestamp comparison. His fingers slowed. The directive was drafted before the voice reached our fleet. Vaughn turned toward him. That is impossible. Ilian swallowed. It was prepared 16 minutes ago. It auto-released after the transmission event. The bridge changed again. Fear did not vanish. It became layered. There was still the moon below them, still the plague, still the unknown voice, still the human ship poised at the shield. But now there was also the terrible shape of intention. Someone had expected the voice. Someone had expected the humans to hear it. Someone had already decided what Sareth must do afterward. Mara Vale watched Sareth through the channel, and the human captain did not look surprised. You knew, Sareth said. We suspected. Based on what? Mara glanced off-screen. A child's distress rhythm, repeated for 43 days without signal decay. That means the survivors had power, discipline, and someone maintaining transmission intervals. But your official scans showed total biological loss. Either your entire quarantine system failed, or someone taught it not to see what mattered. Sareth's voice lowered, and the voice. We picked up fragments in the distress background before we arrived, not enough to translate, enough to know something was answering between the knocks. A tremor moved through the amber shield. Far below, the ash storms over Karos, 7 twisted into spirals around the buried capital, as if the atmosphere itself had begun listening. The moon's old city grid flickered in thermal outline, then disappeared again beneath static. Ilian inhaled sharply. Commander, life signs. Sareth turned. Show me. The display opened, and the bridge saw them. Not millions, not even thousands. Small clusters scattered beneath collapsed districts, hidden under layers of rock, radiation shielding, and old infrastructure. Faint, unstable, half buried in interference, but alive. Hundreds of them, perhaps more beyond the scan's reach. Children, adults, injured bodies huddled in underground shelters the Coalition had declared empty weeks ago. For the first time since the quarantine began, Karos 7 looked less like a dead moon and more like a grave someone had sealed too early. Vaughn stepped back as if the images had heat. Why were these not visible before? Ilian's face had gone pale. Because the quarantine shield has been filtering them out. No one spoke. Then the unknown voice returned. This time it did not whisper. It pressed through the ship's speakers with patient force, surrounding every officer in the sound of something pretending to be calm. They are infected. They are ours. Leave them buried. On the mercy of dawn, Captain Mara Vale closed her eyes for one brief second. When she opened them again, all gentleness had burned out of her expression, leaving something bright and unforgiving beneath the fatigue. Sareth understood then that she had mistaken the human captain's calm for diplomacy. It was not diplomacy. It was restraint. Mara turned from the camera and gave one order, spoken so quietly that Sareth almost missed it. Launch the first rescue wave. Across the mercy of Dawn's hull, 12 armored medical pods dropped from their bays and ignited toward the amber shield. At the same instant, every sterilization cannon in the Coalition blockade began powering up without command. The first sterilization cannon turned toward the moon before any Varen officer touched a control. Then the second. Then the third. Across the blockade, Ships that had spent 43 days holding formation around Karos 7 began shifting their orbital angles with mechanical obedience, their long-range purge arrays rotating down toward the amber-wrapped surface. Command locks flashed open by authority codes older than Saratha's career. Safety confirmations vanished before they could be refused. The fleet was being turned from a quarantine wall into an execution blade, and every officer aboard the flagship watched it happen, with the dawning horror of people realizing their own hands had been stolen. Over-eyed, Sarath snapped. Vaughn lunged to the tactical station. Manual command rejected. Sterilization authority has superseded fleet control. I am fleet control. Not anymore. Below them, the 12 human rescue pods struck the outer quarantine shield. They did not explode. They did not bounce away. They unfolded. For one impossible heartbeat. Each pod became a silver flower of reinforced plates, field anchors, and rotating medical emitters. Human engineering met alien quarantine technology not with brute force, but with a kind of surgical patience. The pods latched onto the shield, measured its pulse, matched its rhythm, and opened narrow corridors through it one by one, not tearing containment apart, but stitching themselves into it. Ilian stared at the readings. They are not breaching the shield. They are borrowing it. Sarath looked from the human pods to the cannons powering above them. Time to sterilization? Vaughn's voice came back hard. 6 minutes. 6 minutes. On the main display, the countdown appeared in red over the surface of Karos 7. 6 minutes until the cannons fired. 6 minutes until every underground shelter, every faint life sign, every child still knocking beneath the ruins, became a mathematical correction in a coalition report. 6 minutes until the humans either pulled survivors from a dead moon or became part of the ash. Captain Mara Vale appeared again, but her bridge was no longer calm in the ordinary sense. It had become fast, precise. Controlled chaos moved behind her in flowing lines. A medic ran past carrying sealed blood packs. A pilot shouted pod telemetry. Someone reported shield harmonics. Someone else called out that the first rescue corridor was stable for 87 seconds. No more. Yet Mara's face remained fixed on Sarath, as if the two commanders were standing in the same room with a loaded weapon between them. "Commander," Mara said, "your fleet is about to fire." "I know. Stop it." Sarath did not waste time defending herself. "We are locked out." For the first time, Mara's expression shifted into something like grim recognition. Not surprise, not disappointment. Recognition, as if she had expected betrayal, but had hoped to be wrong by a few more minutes. "Then give us your cannon targeting frequencies," Mara said. Vaughn recoiled. "Absolutely not." Sarath's eyes stayed on the human captain. "What will you do with them?" "Blind them, if we can. Break them, if we must." "You are asking me to hand a foreign vessel the control profile of coalition purge weapons. I am asking you whether those weapons are yours anymore." That landed harder than any threat could have. Sarath looked at the tactical map. Her ships, her crews, her oath, her law, all of it had been folded into a command chain that now pointed downward at buried civilians. The old part of her, the disciplined part, searched for a rule that still made sense. The newer, quieter part listened to the knocking. 3, 2, 3. Still coming from beneath the capital. Still alive. Sarath turned to Ilian. "Send the frequencies." Vaughn spun toward her. "Commander, send them. If the Council reviews this, if the Council survives its own review, it may question me then." Ilian transmitted the data with shaking hands. The Mercy of Dawn received it in less than a second. Along its white hull, panels opened that the earlier scans had not identified because they had not been weapons in any familiar sense. Long spines of blue-white light rose from beneath medical plating. They were not cannons. They were interference lances designed to cut signal pathways, sever automated locks, and cauterize corrupted systems before they could spread. The alien bridge went silent as the human mercy ship aimed at the blockade. Vaughn whispered, "That is cyberwar hardware." Mara's voice came through, cold and clear. "No, it is hospital equipment." Then the Mercy of Dawn fired. There was no explosion, no dramatic bloom of violence. Thin lines of blue-white precision passed across the fleet like needles through skin. One sterilization cannon went dark, then another, then 3 more. Human interference burned through override chains, severed unauthorized command loops, and left the ships themselves untouched. It was not an attack on the fleet. It was surgery performed at orbital range. For 14 seconds, hope returned. Then the moon screamed. Every speaker across the blockade filled with a sound too layered to be one voice. It was the same presence that had warned them away, but now the mask had cracked. Beneath its calm words was pressure, hunger, and rage. The quarantine shield flared black from within, and the human rescue corridors began collapsing one after another. "They are stealing the shield," Ilian shouted. "Something below is rewriting the harmonics." On the display, the first rescue pod punched through and vanished into the storm. The second followed. The third began to shake violently halfway through the corridor, its hull flashing under stress. Mara turned from the camera. "Pod 3, aboard entry." A pilot's voice answered through static. "Negative, Captain. We have a shelter lock. 32 life signs under us. Your corridor is collapsing. We see it. You will be crushed." A pause. Then the pilot answered with a calm that made Saratha's officers look at one another in disbelief. "Then we go faster." Pod 3 ignited every descent thruster and drove itself through the collapsing shield like a bullet through a closing fist. The corridor snapped shut behind it with a flash of amber and black. The pod's signal vanished. Mara stood very still. Sarath expected grief, fear, something visible. Instead, the human captain's voice lowered into a tone so controlled it made the entire bridge feel colder. "Mark Pod 3 as signal lost, not dead." Vaughn stared at the human display. "They are gone." Mara heard him. "No," she said. "They are below the shield with 32 reasons to keep moving." The countdown resumed. For minutes, the remaining sterilization cannons adjusted, now shielded by the same buried intelligence, controlling the moon's harmonics. The Mercy of Dawn's interference lances fired again, but half the shots scattered into useless light. The enemy below had learned. Ilian's console flashed with a new signal, not from the voice, from Pod 3. A single burst of corrupted telemetry clawed its way through the shield, carrying video for less than 2 seconds. Sarath saw darkness, emergency lights, human medics, falling hard inside a ruined underground chamber, small alien faces staring up from behind broken barricades, and behind them, painted across the shelter wall in dried black fluid, were words written in coalition script. "We were never sick." Then the transmission cut out. Above the moon, the last purge cannons reached final charge. The words on the shelter wall did not vanish when the transmission died. They remained in Saratha's mind with the awful permanence of a verdict. We were never sick. For one fractured second, the bridge of the Varen flagship became 2 places at once. It was still the command center of a quarantine fleet, lit by red countdown warnings and tactical overlays, surrounded by officers fighting systems that no longer obeyed them. But it was also suddenly an archive, a courtroom, a grave opening beneath official language. Every report Sarath had signed, every containment order she had enforced, every delay she had accepted, because the Council said rescue was impossible, now leaned toward one impossible question. If they were never sick, then what had the Coalition sealed inside? The last purge cannons reached final charge. "Firing sequence in 90 seconds, Vaughn said, but his voice had lost its old certainty. He sounded like an officer reading the weather over a battlefield where his own family stood. Mara Vale did not ask again for permission. She did not plead, threaten, or waste a breath on outrage. On the Mercy of Dawn's bridge, she looked once at the broken telemetry from Pod 3, once at the cannon alignment, and once at the moon below, where human medics were now trapped with survivors beneath a shield being controlled by something that wanted them buried. Then she said, "Open the old compartments." The effect aboard the human ship was immediate. Panels that had not appeared on any coalition scan unlocked along the Mercy of Dawn's spine. Hidden cavities opened behind medical white plating, not with the aggressive geometry of weapons bays, but with the heavy, reluctant motion of machinery built for last choices. Coils rose from beneath the hull, thick with insulation and old burn marks. Capacitor rings lit one by one in a color too deep to be blue and too bright to be white. The ship's energy profile changed so violently that Ilian flinched back from his console. "Commander," he whispered, "that system was not powered before." Sareth stepped toward the display. "What is it?" "I do not know. It is older than the rest of the ship. Different architecture. The power routing does not match their current design." Vaughn's throat plates tightened. "A hidden weapon." Captain Vale heard him through the open channel, and for the first time since the encounter began, she looked directly at the Varen tactical officer. "No," she said, "an old rescue tool." The first capacitor reached full charge. The Mercy of Dawn shuddered. Not from attack, from memory. Across the human ship, lights dimmed in the corridors as power rerouted away from comfort, away from non-essential systems, away from everything except containment engines and the ancient machine now waking beneath the hull. In the medical launch bays, rescue teams grabbed railings as gravity briefly flickered. In triage wards, empty stretchers locked themselves to the floor. In the engine room, alarms multiplied so quickly they became one continuous tone, but the human crew did not shout over them. They answered them, one problem at a time, one failure before the next, one impossible thing made smaller by hands that knew where to go. Sareth watched their life signs spike. Any other species would have called it panic. She knew better now. Their bodies were not breaking. They were sharpening. Every human aboard the Mercy of Dawn had become part of the ship's emergency response, and the ship itself seemed designed around that truth. It did not protect them from disaster by keeping disaster away. It invited disaster in, named its weak points, and gave human hands exactly enough time to fight for the next breath. "Captain," Sareth said, "what are you activating?" Mara's eyes did not leave the purge countdown. "A storm gate." Ilian turned sharply. "That translation cannot be right." "It is close enough," Mara said. "Before we had clean quarantine corridors, before modern containment fields, before we trusted automation to keep infection away from civilians, Earth built ships that could evacuate cities through fire, radiation, vacuum, or atmosphere that wanted to kill them. Storm gates were designed to punch temporary rescue tunnels through impossible conditions." Vaughn stared at the display. "You had this technology and did not use it first." Mara's answer came flat. "It kills the ship using it." The bridge went silent. There it was, the midpoint truth that turned every assumption inside out. The Mercy of Dawn had not been holding back because it was weak. It had been holding back because its strongest option was not a weapon against enemies. It was a sacrifice mechanism, a tool built by a species that had looked at disaster and decided that if the door would not open, they would turn the ship itself into a door. Sareth understood then why the inward-facing emitters existed, why the hull was layered beyond efficiency, why the medical decks were armored like fortresses. Why the crew carried themselves like soldiers, even under a mercy emblem. Human rescue was not soft. It was war against extinction. The unknown presence, below, felt it too. The moon's voice tore through every channel, no longer calm, no longer pretending to be a warning system. Do not bring the old fire here. Mara's expression hardened. So the thing beneath Caro's 7 new human technology. That realization passed through Sereth like ice. Captain, she said slowly, how does it know what that is? Mara did not answer immediately. Behind her, an older medic secured a helmet beneath his chin and looked toward the command display with the exhausted face of someone who had carried too many people out of too many ruins. A young pilot crossed herself in some human gesture Sereth did not understand. An engineer kissed 2 fingers and pressed them to a photograph taped above her console. No one looked confused. No one asked what the voice meant. They had suspected this too. Mara finally spoke, and her voice had become quieter than before, because this is not the first world where something answered from under the dead. The purge countdown hit 60 seconds. Seretha's fleet struggled against stolen commands. Her officers tried manual cuts, physical disconnects, emergency isolation, anything that might separate the purge cannons from the override. One gun went dark. Another stuttered and came back under enemy control. The buried intelligence adapted faster than Varen systems could resist. The Mercy of Dawn began moving toward the shield. Not the rescue pods this time. The whole ship. Seretha's breath caught. Captain Vale, stop. If that gate fails, your vessel will be trapped inside the quarantine field. Yes. If the purge cannons fire while you are in the corridor, they will hit us first. You are placing your ship between the cannons and the moon. Mara looked at her then, and there was no performance in the human's face, no dramatic pride, no hunger for martyrdom. Only a commander measuring cost and time with brutal clarity. There are people under us, Mara said. That is where we belong. The words struck Sereth with a force no weapon had managed. The human did not say alien people. She did not say colonists. She did not say citizens of another government that had abandoned them. People, as if that category alone was enough to move a ship into the path of orbital fire. The storm gate opened. A ring of blue-white force unfolded from the Mercy of Dawn's spine and slammed into the quarantine shield. The amber barrier convulsed. For 3 seconds, the entire moon disappeared behind light. Then a tunnel formed through the shield, narrow, unstable, and burning at the edges like a wound held open by willpower. Inside it, Sereth saw the impossible. The quarantine shield was not simply blocking the plague. It was feeding something. Black veins ran through the amber light, pulsing downward into the moon's buried infrastructure. The shield had become a cage and a feeding tube, draining power, heat, and biological signals from the survivors below. The people under Caro's 7 had not been infected. They had been harvested slowly under the cover of containment. Ilian made a sound that was almost pain. Commander, the life signs are being used as anchors. Vaughn whispered. For what? The answer came from the moon itself. The ash storm split. Beneath the ruined capital, a circular structure emerged in thermal outline, too precise to be natural, too vast to be colonial, buried under the city like an eye that had waited for civilization to build above it. It pulsed in rhythm with the children's knocking. 3, 2, 3. The purge countdown reached 20 seconds. Mara's voice cut through the terror. All hands, brace for gate contact. The Mercy of Dawn drove itself into the tunnel, placing its hull between the cannons and the moon, between the abandoned and the official decision to erase them. Then Pod 3 transmitted again. This time the video lasted 5 seconds. A human medic stood in a shelter full of alien children, helmet cracked, one arm hanging uselessly, still holding the camera up. Behind him, the survivors were not covered in plague lesions. They were thin, terrified, and alive. Beyond the shelter doors, something black moved through the corridor like liquid shadow. The medic spoke 3 words before the signal collapsed. It follows voices. The purge cannons fired. The purge cannons struck the mercy of dawn instead of the moon. For one blinding instant, the human rescue ark became the brightest object in orbit. White medical plating vanished beneath sheets of sterilization fire. The outer hull burned so fiercely that Saratha's display reduced the image to a trembling silhouette wrapped in artificial sunrise. Every ship in the blockade shook from the discharge backlash, but the mercy of dawn did not move aside. It held its place inside the storm gate, wedged between the stolen weapons and the buried survivors, like a hand forced into the jaws of a closing machine. Damage reading, Sarath demanded. Ilian's voice broke on the first attempt. He swallowed and tried again. Outer hull layer is failing across 40% of exposed surface. Thermal webbing is overloaded. Radiation catch layer is absorbing lethal output. Their gate field is still active. Vaughn stared at the impossible numbers. No vessel survives direct purge fire. Their vessel is not surviving, Ilian whispered. It is spending itself. On the screen, the mercy of dawn burned and continued working. Inside the human ship, the first impact had thrown Captain Mara Vale against the command rail hard enough to split the skin above her brow. Blood slid down the side of her face, bright and startling against the blue emergency lights, but she did not wipe it away. Around her, the bridge had become a place of sparks, alarms, and disciplined voices. A ceiling panel had collapsed near the navigation pit. One officer was on the floor, with a medic sealing a pressure wound at his shoulder. Another had strapped herself to her console with one hand while rerouting power with the other. Nobody asked if they were dying. They asked which systems still answered. Gate integrity, Mara said. 62% and falling. The engineering officer replied. Cores 2 and 5 are redlining. Core 7 is compensating. But if we keep taking purge fire, the spine will fracture. Time to fracture? 4 minutes. Maybe less. Then we have 4 minutes. Sarath heard the exchange through the open channel and felt something inside her shift beyond fear. The humans were not speaking like soldiers trapped in a doomed ship. They were speaking like workers racing a deadline. The distinction was terrible. They had already placed their own survival below the task. All that remained was calculation. Below them, through the burning storm gate, the rescue pods began transmitting fragmented reports from the surface. Pod 1 had reached a collapsed school complex and found 49 survivors sealed behind emergency walls. Pod 4 was cutting through a transit tunnel toward a medical shelter. Pod 7 had lost one thruster but was still mobile. Pod 3, the one they had believed crushed, was inside the deepest chamber, where the children had been knocking. Its medics were moving survivors toward extraction, while something followed them through the dark whenever they spoke. The thing beneath Caro's 7 was learning the shape of fear. It moved through sound. Every voice became a trail. Every cry became a doorway. Every command spoken aloud risked leading it to the living. The human teams adapted in seconds. They cut their external speakers. They switched to hand signals, suit taps, text flashes, and pressure-coated wrist pulses. Medics carried crying children against their chests and activated silent calming fields. Engineers placed vibration decoys in empty corridors and watched black shapes pour after false footsteps. Saratha's officers watched the feed in stunned silence. Humans had entered a dead moon, discovered a predator that hunted voices, lost communications discipline, changed doctrine, and continued the rescue without waiting for permission from terror. "Commander," Ilian said, Pod 3 is requesting extraction path confirmation, but they cannot use audio. Sareth looked at the map. The route between Pod 3 and the storm gate was collapsing. The buried structure under the capital had awakened further, shifting tunnels, sealing old doors, opening others that had not existed in any colonial blueprint. Survivors were scattered across 3 levels. Human teams were converging on them. But the paths were becoming traps. Can we transmit visual routing? Sareth asked. To the humans, yes. To the pods, maybe. The shield interference is heavy. Mara's voice came through, strained but steady. Commander Sareth, we need local infrastructure access. Maintenance grids. Transit schematics. Anything pre-collapse. Vaughn looked sharply at Sareth. Those files are restricted. Sareth did not look at him. Send them. Commander. Send them now. For the second time in less than 10 minutes, a Varen officer gave humans access to protected coalition systems. This time, no one on the bridge protested after Vaughn. They had seen the children. They had seen the wall. They had seen the ship burning in the path of their own cannons. Ilian transferred the files. The Mercy of Dawn's tactical medical system swallowed the alien maps and transformed them into rescue routes, marking safe corridors in green, unstable structures in amber, and sound-sensitive zones in black. The human ship then did something Sareth had not expected. It pushed the updated routes back to every Varen vessel in the blockade, not as a request, as an invitation. On Sareth's display, rescue lanes appeared beside her own ship's drop-capable shuttles. Her crews could reach the outer shelters. They could help. They had always been able to help if someone had shown them where the living were. Sareth stood motionless, facing the choice that had been approaching since the first knock. The Council's purge order still screamed through her command system. The cannons were preparing a second firing cycle. Her fleet was compromised, her authority uncertain, her government perhaps criminal. But below her were survivors, and beside her was a human ship burning itself, open to reach them. Prepare rescue shuttles, she said. Vaughn's head snapped toward her. Commander, if our crews enter the quarantine zone, we become legally contaminated. Then we will be contaminated with the truth. The order spread across the flagship first, then to the rest of the blockade. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Sareth feared discipline would fail in the wrong direction, that her officers would choose safety because safety had always sounded like wisdom. Then the first Varen shuttle bay opened, then another, then 6 more across the fleet. Small alien rescue craft launched toward the storm gate, trembling in the purge-lit glow of the burning human ark. Mara saw them coming. For the first time since the cannons fired, she allowed herself the smallest breath of relief. Commander Sareth, your shuttles need to stay inside our gate wake. Do not break formation. Do not answer any voice you hear from the surface, even if it sounds like someone you know. Sareth's blood chilled. Why would it sound like someone we know? Before Mara could answer, every speaker on the Varen bridge came alive with a familiar voice. It was Sareth's own voice. Calm, commanding, perfectly copied. All rescue craft. Abort human corridor and descend through secondary vector. Repeat, abandon the human gate. I have assumed direct control. Vaughn turned pale. Sareth had not spoken. Outside, 3 Varen shuttles began obeying the false order. The 3 Varen shuttles broke formation and descended toward the false vector. For 2 seconds, no one moved. The lie had been too perfect. Sareth had heard her own command voice used against her with the exact weight, rhythm, and authority she had spent decades building. It had copied not only sound, but certainty. It had reached into her fleet, worn her discipline like a mask, and turned obedience into a weapon. Then Captain Mara Vale's voice cut through the channel like steel through wire. Shoot their engines. Sareth turned sharply toward the display. What? Disable the shuttles before they cross out of the gate wake. Vaughn stared at the 3 falling craft. There are crews inside. And if they leave the corridor, there will not be for long. The false Seraph spoke again through every open band, calm and flawless. All vessels, human command is compromised. Mercy of Dawn is attempting hostile control. Redirect immediately. One of the drifting shuttles corrected farther from the storm gate, following the lie. Below it, the quarantine shield darkened, and something under the clouds opened a path that had not existed moments before. It looked safe. Too safe. A smooth amber tunnel leading away from the burning human rescue corridor, away from purge fire, away from danger. Ilian's scanner screamed, "Commander! The secondary vector has no surface exit. It terminates inside the buried structure." Seraph understood at once. The thing was not calling the shuttles down. It was swallowing them. "Target their engines," she ordered. Vaughn hesitated for the smallest fraction of a second, and in that fraction Seraph saw the entire horror of command. The law had trained them to preserve assets, protect crews, avoid friendly fire, follow clean decision chains. Humanity had trained itself for uglier truths. Sometimes saving people meant hurting them before something worse could take them whole. "Do it," Seraph said. The flagship fired 3 narrow, disabling pulses. The first shuttle lost thrust and tumbled back toward the gate wake, emergency stabilizers flashing. The second spun hard, its engine plumes sputtering out as human guidance beams caught it and dragged it sideways. The third was almost beyond reach. For one terrible moment, it slipped toward the false corridor, and the darkness below seemed to rise eagerly to meet it. Then the Mercy of Dawn fired one of its inward-facing containment lances outward. The beam clipped the shuttle's drive housing with surgical precision, killing its main engine without breaching the crew compartment. The shuttle rolled helplessly, but alive, back into the human corridor. A rescue pod caught it with magnetic clamps and pulled it upward. Sarath's bridge released a breath it had not known it was holding. Captain Vale did not. "Commander, the entity has your command profile now. Assume every order from your own system is compromised unless verified by visual code." "How did it copy me?" Sarath asked. Mara glanced toward an off-screen damage report. Sparks rained behind her. The storm gate's glow pulsed weaker through the bridge windows. "It follows voices. Yours has been transmitted across the blockade for 43 days. Sarath felt the truth land coldly. Every order she had given, every containment update, every reassurance that sterilization was necessary, every formal statement declaring the moon dead. The thing beneath Karos, Seven had listened to all of it, learned her authority, and waited for the moment her own fleet would trust the sound of her more than the sight of the truth. Below, the rescue operation became a silent war. Varen's shuttles entered the gate wake in staggered formation, guided by pulsing lights from the Mercy of Dawn. Human pods marked safe descent paths with blue flares. No one used voice unless absolutely necessary. Messages appeared as text, color, motion, and coded pulses. The blockade, once built to prevent escape, became a trembling bridge into the dead moon. On the surface, Pod 3's team moved through the deepest shelter, with 71 survivors. The feed returned in fragments. A cracked helmet camera showed human medics moving through a corridor painted with old children's handprints. Alien civilians clung to rescue straps in silence, their mouths covered by human calming masks that released oxygen and muted sound. One child tried to cry, and a human medic pressed the child's face gently against his chest plate, tapping a rhythm through the suit. 3, 2, 3. Not loud enough for the thing to hear, strong enough for the child to understand. The black shape followed anyway. It poured along the ceiling like liquid night, bending around broken lights, stopping whenever the humans stopped, moving whenever someone's breath became too loud. It had no clear body, only edges. Where it passed, metal frosted. Where it touched walls, old paint peeled backward, as if time itself wanted to retreat. Ilian's hands trembled over his console. Captain Vale, Pod 3's path is closing. The structure is shifting ahead of them. Mara looked at the route. Alternative. None that reaches the gate before collapse. Then make one. The answer came from the Mercy of Dawn's engineering deck, where Chief Amara Singh stood waist-deep in smoke beside a console that was melting at the edges. Captain, we can widen the storm gate and punch a hard corridor through the old transit spine. Cost. A pause. Sareth knew that pause now. Humans used silence when the number was ugly. Singh answered, we burn the last 2 stable cores. Gate holds for 90 seconds after that. Then it dies, and we lose orbital lift. Vaughn whispered, they will not be able to leave. Mara heard him, but her eyes were on the survivor's feed, on the children, on the medic, still tapping the old emergency rhythm through his suit. Do it, she said. Sareth stepped closer to the display. Captain, if your ship loses orbital lift inside the shield, it will fall. Yes, my fleet can tow you out if you keep partial thrust. No, Commander, your fleet needs to evacuate survivors. Mara. It was the first time Sareth had used the human's name for a heartbeat. Both commanders simply looked at each other across fire, law, betrayal, and a moon full of voices that should have been saved sooner. Mara's expression softened, not into surrender, but into a terrible kind of peace. Sareth, this ship was built to be spent. The storm gate widened. The Mercy of Dawn screamed without sound as its final stable cores dumped power into the corridor. Blue-white force punched down through the shield, through storm, through collapsing infrastructure, and into the old transit spine beneath the capital. A path opened in front of Pod 3, raw and burning, lined with molten metal and shaking stone. The medics ran. They did not run like heroes in stories. They ran like people carrying too much weight with too little time. Survivors stumbled between them. Children were passed from arm to arm. A human with a broken leg locked his suit joints straight and became a living brace for 2 aliens too weak to walk. Another medic stayed behind at a junction, placing vibration decoys one by one, leading the black shape away with false footsteps. Mara watched the timer. 70 seconds. The purge cannons began charging again. This time, the entity controlled only 3 of them, but 3 were enough. Their barrels turned toward the storm gate's center, toward the Mercy of Dawn's exposed spine. Sareth looked at her tactical board. Her flagship still had 1 manual battery not connected to the compromised system. It was short-range, underpowered, meant for debris interception, not war. But the purge cannon nearest the gate had rotated close enough. Vaughn, she said, destroy Cannon 6. Vaughn's eyes widened. That is Coalition property. Sareth looked at the children climbing through the human corridor, at the ship dying to hold the path, at the false orders still trying to speak with her voice. No, she said. It is evidence. The flagship fired. Cannon 6 shattered. Across the blockade, other Varen captains understood. One by one, they turned manual weapons against their own purge systems. The quarantine fleet began dismantling the murder machine it had guarded for 43 days. 40 seconds. Pod 3 reached the extraction lane. 29 survivors crossed into the first shuttle. Then 40. Then 60. The medic with the cracked helmet came last, dragging a sealed case marked with human biohazard warnings. Ilian leaned forward. What is that? The medic's text signal flashed across the screen. Proof. Then the black shape surged behind him, wearing Saretha's voice one final time. Leave the case. Save the children. The medic stopped. For 1 horrifying second, it looked as if he might obey. Then he lifted the case, shoved it into the shuttle, and stepped backward into the corridor as the door sealed in front of him. Mara's voice broke for the first time. Evan's move. The medic turned toward the camera. Behind him, the darkness opened like a mouth. His text message appeared on every display. Tell Earth it learned our voices. Then the feed went black.
Has vanished into the darkness, but his final warning changes everything. The entity learned human voices, copied Sarith, and now wears the dead-like masks. The survivors are out, but the real danger may have trying to escape with them.
For 1 second after Evans disappeared, nobody on the Mercy of Dawn moved. The shuttle carrying the survivors cleared the transit spine with the sealed evidence case locked to its floor. Human medics, inside it, held children against their armor and kept their mouths covered, because even grief had to wait until silence was safe. Behind them, the burning corridor collapsed in stages, folding back into amber and black as the storm gate lost power. The last image from Evans's helmet remained frozen on the main display. Darkness opening behind him, his final message still glowing beneath it. Tell Earth it learned our voices. Captain Mara Vale stared at those words while the ship around her died. The Mercy of Dawn had no stable cores left. Its engines coughed instead of burned. Its spine was cracked open along 2 decks. Its hull, once white with the symbol of mercy, was now blackened and glowing at the edges, caught halfway inside the quarantine shield like a wounded animal refusing to release its jaws. The storm gate flickered, thinner with every pulse, but it still held enough shape for the final evacuation shuttles to climb through. Last survivor shuttle is clear, Lieutenant Rouse said from navigation, his voice rough through smoke. Varen craft are exiting behind it. We have 94 confirmed survivors aboard external rescue assets. Mara did not look away from the surface feed. Pod teams. Pods 1, 4, 7, and 9 returning. Pod 3 is gone. The word gone landed across the bridge with brutal simplicity. Nobody softened it. Nobody dressed it in procedure. Humans had a way of letting the truth stand bare when there was no time to kneel beside it. Mara finally wiped the blood from her face with the back of her hand. Seal the gate behind the last shuttle. Chief Singh's voice came through the engineering channel, distorted by static and pain. Captain, once we seal it, we lose the only open corridor out. I know. We are still inside the shield. I know. A silence followed, and in it Sarith heard the difference between obedience and loyalty. Singh was not refusing. She was asking her captain to say the cost out loud, so none of them could pretend they had missed it. Mara's answer came softly. The survivors leave first. On the Varen flagship, Commander Sarith watched the last shuttle rise out of the burning corridor, carrying children her government had declared dead. Some were Varen, some were Kurosi, some belonged to species that had no ships in the blockade and no votes in the council. In the lead shuttle, the sealed evidence case pulsed with its own emergency beacon, broadcasting enough preliminary data for every vessel to know the truth before anyone could bury it again. There had been no natural plague. The pathogen warnings had been fabricated around an older discovery beneath the colony. The buried structure was not a disease source, but a dormant intelligence awakened by illegal extraction drilling. It had learned through sound, fed through the quarantine shield, and used the sealed survivors as living anchors while coalition officials falsified reports to protect the operation that had found it. The coalition had not quarantined a plague. It had protected a crime. Sarith felt the weight of that truth pass through her fleet. She saw it in the way her officers stopped looking at the council directives and started looking at the human ship. The Mercy of Dawn had been burned, crippled, and nearly broken by Varen weapons, yet it had not returned fire on her fleet. It had cut only the systems killing civilians. It had used its strongest power not to win a battle, but to hold open a road for strangers. Then the thing beneath Caro's Seven spoke again. This time it did not wear Saratha's voice. It wore Evans's. "Mara," it said through every channel, gentle and familiar. "Open the gate. I found more survivors." The Mercy of Dawn went utterly still. On the bridge, a medic lowered his head. Rao closed his eyes. Singh whispered something in a human language Sarath did not understand. Mara gripped the command rail until her knuckles went pale, and for the first time Sarath saw the human captain's restraint become visible effort. The voice continued, wearing the dead man like stolen clothing. "They are trapped below. Children, you cannot leave them." Mara's face changed, not into doubt, into grief sharpened into a weapon. "You should have chosen a voice we loved less," she said. "We know how our dead speak. They do not ask us to waste the living." The thing screamed. The quarantine shield convulsed inward, black veins racing toward the final gate opening. If it reached the evacuation lane before the seal completed, it would follow the survivors through. It would enter the shuttles, the fleet, the trade corridor, every world connected by voice and signal. The Mercy of Dawn had seconds left to decide whether mercy ended with rescue or demanded something harder. Mara turned to Sarath. "Commander, pull every shuttle clear." Sarath understood before the order came. "Captain." "Now." Sarath gave the command. Varan's shuttles burned away from the shield. Human pods followed, dragging survivors and wounded crews into the safety of open space. The last pod hesitated near the Mercy of Dawn, its pilot refusing the obvious, until Mara opened a private channel and said only one word: "Go." The pod left. The storm gate seal collapsed to a narrow ring. Mara looked across her bridge at the people who had chosen this before she asked them. Some were injured, some were crying silently, some simply sat at their stations, hands steady, eyes forward. 312 humans had come to a dead moon because someone had knocked back. Fewer would leave, but the living had left, and that was the ancient arithmetic of rescue. "Chief," Mara said, "turn the containment grid inward." Singh exhaled once. With pleasure. The inward-facing systems that had terrified the aliens at first finally revealed their purpose. They were not weapons hidden inside a hospital. They were the final promise of a rescue ship that refused to become a carrier for the disaster it entered. Every internal emitter rotated toward the storm gate core. Every sterilization grid, every containment lance, every corridor cutter and firebreak aligned into one perfect circle of controlled destruction. The Mercy of Dawn turned itself into a lock. Then it closed. Blue-white fire erupted from within the ship, not outward toward the fleet, but inward through its own broken decks and into the collapsing gate. The black veins reaching from Karos, Seven struck the containment wall and burned. The stolen voices screamed all at once. Saratha's, Evans's, Children's Council officials, thousands of echoes the thing had collected in the dark. The Mercy of Dawn held them there and burned with them. For 12 seconds, the human ship was silent. Then the quarantine shield shattered. Not exploded. Shattered, like glass around a fist. The amber shell broke into 1,000 fading arcs, and Karos, Seven appeared beneath it for the first time in 43 days, wounded but visible, no longer hidden behind the lie of containment. The buried structure under the capital went dark. The voices stopped. The purge cannons, half destroyed by Saratha's fleet, fell cold. Where the Mercy of Dawn had been, there was wreckage, but not absence that a battered central hull section drifted free of the broken gate, emergency lights still blinking along its torn spine. One engine coughed blue, then another. Weak, unstable, impossible. Ilian's hands flew over his scanner. His voice cracked. "Life signs. Commander, I have life signs aboard the human vessel." Sarath stepped closer. "How many?" Ilian looked up, eyes wet with disbelief. "Enough." Across open space, Captain Maravale's voice returned through static, faint and smoke-roughened. "Commander Sereth," she said, "we have wounded aboard and no working coffee machine. Requesting assistance." For a moment, no one on the Varen bridge understood the second part. Then one officer made a broken sound that might have been laughter or relief, or grief discovering it was allowed to breathe. Sereth opened the fleet-wide channel. This time, every ship verified her command by visual code before listening. "All vessels," she said, "recover the human ship, protect the survivors, preserve the evidence." She paused, looking at the shattered moon, the rescued children, the broken Mercy Ark that had frightened them more than any warship because it had shown them what courage looked like when stripped of glory. "And transmit to Coalition Command," she continued. "Karos, 7 was not sterilized. The dead were not dead. The humans were right." Hours later, when the first official classification update crossed the fleet archive, Ilian wrote the new human entry himself. He deleted the old tags: young species, moderate threat, unpredictable rescue doctrine. In their place, he entered one line: humanity, the species that enters death zones for strangers and brings enough fire to make death step back.
Lesson of the Mercy of Dawn: real courage is not violence, pride or glory. Humanity entered Crew 7 for strangers, exposed a bride crying, saved the children, and proved that mercy can be the fiercest weapon in the galaxy.